Thank you for tuning in. This is the Rice Crypto Show, and I'm your host, Rice. And on today's episode, I am joined by a man who needs no introduction, Anthony Pompliano, also known as Pomp. But before we get into it, this is your first time ever checking out any of my content, I do encourage you to explore my channel. Make sure you subscribed, smash that like button, hit the notification bell so you can stay up to date with my videos as they come out, and be sure to follow me on LBRY where I post exclusive content, and I'm going to have links down below for my LBRY channel. So we're just going to go ahead and get right into today's video. Bang, bang. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I am joined by the man himself, Anthony Pompliano, best known as Pomp. And Pomp, I really appreciate you coming on the show. How you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for having me. Super excited about this.
Yeah, me too, man. I think we're going to have a really great conversation. And for people who are unfamiliar with you, you're the co-founder and partner at Morgan Creek Digital. You're the host of the Pomp podcast, and you're doing a new show with your wife, The Lunchbox, which I think is really cool. So I encourage people to check that out if they're unfamiliar with you. And I will include links down below so people can check you out. But I'm pretty sure most people know who you are. How's quarantine life treating you, man?
Look, it's definitely interesting, right? But all good. We're in New York City, and pretty much if you stay inside and you don't go do anything too crazy, you'll be all right. So no complaints.
Okay, cool. Well, I'm glad that you're using your time well. I'm glad to see you putting out a lot of content, man. You've been putting out some awesome interviews. I mean, I take pride in my interviews, but you're killing it, man. And I really appreciate what you're doing for the space. And so I wanted to, bring you on and talk with you a little bit about what's going on with the global economy, this financial crisis that we're experiencing. February, just in this year alone, not to even backtrack, just this year alone, February, we saw all-time highs in the stock market. And then we got the news about the virus and everything that's happening with that. And then early March, we seen, I think it was like maybe the 8th, maybe 12th, I'm not exactly sure the date. On a Sunday, the Dow Jones futures dropped like 2,000 points. The next day, everything, when the markets opened up on Monday, we seen like a 7% drop. Kill switch was engaged. They did that twice. Now we see like the country being shut down, unemployment numbers rising, and then we're seeing quantitative easing, infinity coming into play now to be the scapegoat, the virus being the scapegoat for what's going on. And, then, I'm seeing now we're hitting back again, like in good record numbers in the stock market. But at the same time, we have incredibly high record numbers of unemployment. And people are talking about comparing this to the Great Depression. IMF is like putting out reports talking about famine on biblical proportions. So, I mean, all that considered, I'd really like to kind of just get your overall thoughts on all that. I know it's a lot.
Yeah. Look, it's kind of the most important story right now, right? And in my opinion, there's multiple components to it. So if you look at business, you get the government mandated shutdown because of the virus. So that drives small businesses essentially close to zero revenue. There's some that are still open, but for the most part, most small businesses are shut down right now. And they don't have a lot of capital on hand. And therefore, they get into a position where in order to preserve capital on their balance sheet, they've got to fire a lot of employees, let those employees go collect unemployment, and hope that they can survive coming out of this. And then you see at the businesses that are open, a significant drop in revenue because people just aren't allowed out of their houses. So even though the corner store is open, you still are not going to see as much traffic there as they would normally see.
Right.
And then when you look at even larger stores or businesses, things like airlines and hospitality and travel and all of that, again, people just aren't doing that stuff. And you see kind of record low numbers across the board for those businesses. And so what ultimately happens is you've got a health crisis that's driving an economic crisis. That economic crisis is leading to businesses literally being shut down. My estimation is 20 to 25% of those businesses will not come back. On the small business side. Small businesses are responsible for 50% of jobs in America.
Yeah.
So you've got 26 plus million Americans in the last 5 weeks that have had to file for unemployment, and some good portion of them are not going back to jobs. Right? There's not going to be their job available even when the economy restarts. And so I think that all is a pretty dire situation. But when people look and compare kind of the economic reality on the ground to the stock market, it's a stark reminder that the stock market is not a representation of the economy. The stock market is a representation of central bank actions, right? And those central bank actions are, they realize that there's a really, really bad economic situation happening here. And so what do? They go to step in and say, look, we have to provide help to people. And they've done that through a number of different mechanisms. Some of those were things around creating lending facilities for the overnight repo markets, lending money directly to certain assets, buying certain financial assets, but then also saying, look, we need to help businesses and individuals as well. And so we saw the $2 trillion stimulus package passed, I think it was like 3 weeks ago. In that was everything from money that was allocated directly to things like schools, all the way to $350 billion for small businesses. And so that money ran out, right, for all intents and purposes, within 2 weeks. And they basically had to go back and replenish that now. And so that brings us.
But really real quick, that whole thing was actually like more like over 6 trillion. It was just the 2 that was designated towards like the things that you're speaking about. There was 4 trillion that was for the quantitative easing and for propping up the markets.
Yeah. So basically, if you go to the Fed balance sheet, right, we started earlier this year around $4 trillion, give or take. I think now we're at 6 point, something. I forget the last numbers. And we're basically adding a couple $100 billion a week, right? And when you look at the chart, it's literally vertical, right? I mean, like it's just expanding so rapidly. And so what that ultimately brings the question around is just, does all of this printing of money lead to inflation, or will we actually see a situation similar to 2008, 2009, and kind of out of that crisis where there was such a deflationary environment that they couldn't print enough money to get high levels of inflation, right? Actually, that the deflationary environment could soak up all of that printing of capital. And, look, the longer this thing goes on, that we're in a deflationary environment and they keep printing, I tend to get more and more convinced that actually there's no number they could print that could create kind of high levels of inflation right now, because there is so much of a deflationary environment. And also on a relative basis, every other country is printing so much money as well. So if you look at, Japan announced $1 trillion stimulus package, many others are kind of injecting liquidity into the market. And so it's kind of this weird situation where they're printing a lot, but so is everyone else in the world.
Right.
And then what ends up being the core asset is the reserve currency or the dollar.
Well, I mean, it's that meme that's going around, the money printer go Brrr. I mean, it makes complete sense, and it's actually what's happening. So, I mean, with that being said, and everything that you just said, like, how long can this go on? Like, they can't do this forever. I mean, we will eventually, if they continue to try to do this in this manner, we're going to see a high form of inflation like what Japan has seen, or we're going to go into that hyperinflationary state that Zimbabwe and Venezuela is seeing. So, I mean, what do you think is like going to be that catalyst, or like how long can they really do this?
Yeah, I think they can do it for a long time, right? And part of it is because everyone else around the world can do it for a long time as well. And so kind of the relative nature is really important. And on top of that, I also think that what they're seeing in the economic data is, hey, we printed, a couple 100 billion, we printed 2 trillion, right? No matter how much we print, it's not having an impact, right? In terms of the economic reality. Now, what it is having an impact on is the stock market. So what investors are doing is they're speculating, saying, look at all this money that's being printed. We know the currency is going to get devalued. That means asset prices will stabilize and rise. And so they're literally speculating on the future rise of prices in the stock market. Now, I think that there's going to be a kind of reckoning or a reality check when earnings season comes for Q2 of this year, and people realize, wait a minute, that business that, even though the stock fell 60% or 50%, and I thought it was a steal, Well, their revenue went down 90%, right? So it's actually overvalued right now compared to what their economic performance is. And so it's going to be really interesting to kind of see, when do they actually get the economies restarted? How quickly do we recover from this? And then once that's Q2 earnings season happens, what the stock prices, do they remain inflated because of central bank actions, or is there some kind of sanity check that goes on in the markets to more kind of accurately represent the economic reality?
And that's, I mean, well said, man. You put it together well. I mean, it's one of those situations I think that we're really going to have to kind of pay attention and just watch, and just see like what happens, because I mean, so far, the markets seem to be reacting well to everything, even all the bad news, everything that's happening in the crude oil markets. And most people don't understand finances, don't understand the market. And when they see a positive stock market, they think everything's going well. But then you see this complete paradigm shift of the opposite end of the spectrum, and we have record high numbers of unemployment. So that in and of itself should make people start to question kind of a little bit of what's going on. And I guess the next thing I wanted to ask you about was your thoughts on these special purpose vehicles. I really find this to be a really interesting subject, even like kind of the theories of where this could be headed. But what are your overall thoughts on the SPVs?
Yeah, so SPVs have been used for a long time to do exactly what they are called. They're for special situations or special purposes, right? And so if you look in the technology industry, for example, people set up SPVs quite regularly, and they do it for kind of one-off deals. So I'm going to go pool a bunch of investors' capital. I'm going to put that into this SPV, which is really just kind of an LLC or legal structure. I'm then going to use that capital for one explicit purpose, right? I'm not going to do a bunch of deals. I'm just going to do this one deal. And so SPVs are pretty well understood there. Same thing happens in credit markets, kind of one-off deals. And so most investors, I think, kind of understand and have experience with these. When the government starts to do it, there's two arguments. One is, hey, that's scary, right? That there's SPVs being set up so that they can kind of skirt regulations and start buying assets that they may otherwise not be allowed to buy or have previously kind of shied away from buying. And then the flip side of that argument, though, is I think that you could make an argument, hey, at least we know where that capital is being earmarked for. It's kind of going in for this one singular purpose. I'm probably more in the former camp than the latter camp as of right now, given what we know. I kind of reserve the right to change my opinion on this, but for right now, when you see, basically the use of these structures to get around the existing rules so that they don't have to go get the rules changed, it's just kind of speaks to the whole philosophy that they're approaching here, which is we're going to do whatever we want to do and we'll find a way to do it. Right. And I just tend to think that is, for the average citizen who doesn't really even understand what's happening, let alone understand the intricacies like this, it's just really, really slippery slope and can get scary very quickly.
Now, would these special purpose vehicles basically just consist of a bunch of junk?
So it depends on which one. To be honest, I'm not like an expert and haven't read super deep into the SPVs and kind of how they're setting these ones up. My understanding, though, is that there are some SPVs being set up so that they can buy the equivalent of junk bonds, right? That kind of high risk credit, and they're going to do that via these structures so that they're not doing it in the direct mode that they traditionally would. The other thing that an SPV could be used for would be something like buying stocks, right? So if all of a sudden you see them start, I keep joking about Jerry's stock picker, which essentially is the idea of like Jerome Powell sitting in a room and literally picking stocks, right? For the most part, that they're more so doing trying to look at ETFs or indexes and that type of stuff. But if we got to a world where literally they're just going to sit and just pick stocks, I think that would kind of set a bunch of alarms off and be pretty scary to kind of see that play out.
That's cool. I appreciate your opinion, and I appreciate you being transparent and like not saying that you're an expert and knowing everything about it, because this is kind of new territory, especially when it comes to the government being involved in this. So it's kind of interesting. And I guess, let's kind of move on to Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, because I did want to get your thoughts on some of that. Right now, we're seeing a shortage of physical metals, like precious metals, like gold and silver, starting to kind of diminish, and people not really having that availability. And in the past, people had been using like gold and silver as a way of preserving their wealth. Um, Now, do you see people adopting Bitcoin and or different cryptocurrencies as a store of wealth in the fact, like just people who wouldn't normally even do this? Do you think this adoption is going to come about because of the fact that they're not going to be able to get this physical item that they used to be able to, obtain?
Yeah, I haven't had anyone who's approached me and said, I want to buy Bitcoin or buy, cryptocurrency because I can't get gold and silver. I have had a lot of people approach me and say, this is a scary situation. I want to look at and learn about Bitcoin. I've had a lot of people actually do that. And so to me, at least in my experience, it's been less about I want some kind of sound money principles and I can't get gold, and more about the Federal Reserve's running a multi-trillion-dollar marketing campaign for Bitcoin, right? I mean, literally, there's
Yeah.
money, and people are like, "Whoa, what does that mean?" And so they start learning about money, how it works, and how that has an impact on their cash. And so I think that there's real issues in kind of the precious metal space. I don't know how sustainable those issues are. Like, is it just right now, especially because it's hard to actually move the precious metals around during a lockdown, versus is it because there's so much demand that it's overwhelming the supply, right? I mean, you could argue, and probably depending on who you talk to in the industry, they would blame different things. But it is for sure that there's some kind of supply shortage and people are having trouble getting their hands on that stuff. And then obviously, I'm pretty clear that I'm a believer in both Bitcoin and gold will do well coming out of this this financial crisis. I choose to really stick just to Bitcoin. I don't own any gold, but I think that as more and more people realize Bitcoin and gold have very similar sound money principles, and all they need is an internet connection to get Bitcoin, rather than deal with the actual physical nature of the precious metals. We will see some people kind of cross over, and I don't know if it'll be a binary thing where, hey, I used to own 5% of my portfolio in gold, I sold it all, now I'm going to go buy 5% in Bitcoin. It may start to do things like, hey, I had 5% gold, maybe I should increase my allocation in today's macro environment to 7.5%. And that new 2.5% is going to end up being in Bitcoin. So now I'm 2.5% Bitcoin, 5% gold. Or you may see somebody say, I got 5% gold, I'm going to split that between Bitcoin and gold. So it'll be 2.5, 2.5. I think that's kind of the conversation people are having right now.
And I definitely appreciate your perspective because you deal with a completely different element of people than just like the everyday person. I mean, I like going into like here in North Carolina, the mom and pops places that are selling the silvers and the golds and stuff like that. They are running out of the supplies. And it could be a combination of that there's with the way that the supply chain is working, that they're not able to get things delivered as well. But it could be a combination of both. Now, me and you are talking today on Sunday the 26th, and I'm going to be putting this out tomorrow on the 27th, but we're still like roughly about 15 days away from the Bitcoin halving. So with that being said, I'd really like, you as such a big Bitcoin advocate, I'd like to really get your thoughts on the Bitcoin halving. I'm not asking for no price prediction, but what do you think about pre-halving and afterwards?
Yeah. So the first piece of this is, I'm assuming most people watching the show know what the halving is.
Well, real quick, if they don't, I'll include links down below and above right here. I interviewed Andreas Antonopoulos, and I actually just did a clip of him talking about and explaining what the halving is from his educational perspective. So if people don't know what the halving is, I definitely encourage people to check that video out. Sorry.
Yeah, no, perfect. So like once you understand what it is, the first thing that I think is important for people to remember is it has to happen, right? And we need to make sure that the code actually executes. So that kind of gets lost a lot of times is people forget, like, there is a world where something happens in the code and the happening doesn't occur, right? I don't believe that that's going to happen, obviously.
Right.
But that's kind of step one, is the halving has to occur. And so we'll find that out in 15 days or so. The second piece of it is it's a supply shock. And the beauty of Bitcoin is that it is programmatic, right? We understand exactly how much is coming in every day. We understand how much is in circulation. And so there's kind of one side of the supply demand equation that is held constant and is known with 100% certainty. So then that leads us to the demand side. And the way that I think about the demand side is the price of Bitcoin will go up over a long period of time as long as demand continues to grow at the pace that it's growing, because Bitcoin is an artificially capped asset.
Right.
Really simple economics 101 type stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Now, the question that you get in kind of the more of the nuances around the price predictions and all of that is, well, what is the rate of change to that current demand to growth? And so is growth going to accelerate, meaning that there's going to be way more demand in the future? Is growth going to decelerate, so there will be less demand, or will it stay constant? I tend to believe that we will see increases in demand over time. It's much harder to go from kind of 1 people to 10 people than it is to go from 70 million to 71 million, right? And so I think that that growth rate on an aggregate number will actually continue, upwards. And so ultimately it's a binary bet, right? You get the halving that's occurring. And the only thing that's different here in some form or fashion is in 2008, gold went down 29% during the summer of 08, during the liquidity crisis. And then after it went down 29%, it rallied over 200% and ended up hitting an all-time high in 2011. So that was when 2008 liquidity crisis, everyone sold every asset they had and tried to get cash.
Right.
Then there's all this money printing. Then they all run to sound money principles, right? And you see gold explode in value. Mm-hmm. Well, there's probably going to be something similar to that coming, over the next few months, if not, call it 24 months. And so right now we've had the liquidity crisis. Everyone sold a bunch of assets. You saw gold went down 12%, Bitcoin went down 50%, stocks went down 30%.
Very much 2008.
Yeah, exactly. And so correlations of all these assets trend toward one liquidity crisis. You then get in a situation where people are printing money. You're going to see folks rush back to the golds, the Bitcoins, real estate, or all these kind of inflation hedge type assets. And I think that you will get price increases in those assets. The only asset, though, that is going to see 50% of the incoming supply disappear right at the same time is Bitcoin. And so it would be like in 2009 through 2011, when everyone was running to gold, all of a sudden, 50% of the gold miners shut down in the world, right? You would have this supply shock and demand shock at the same time. And so I think that's what's going to happen here with Bitcoin. And we'll see a material increase in price kind of through the end of 2021. But, I'm kind of at the point now where I just tell people, my thoughts are pretty public, right? People pretty much know what I think is going to happen. Yeah. They got to do their work and figure out, do they believe it or not? But the key to this, I think, for most people is sizing the risk correctly in their portfolio. So the fallacy that I see most people kind of go towards is, should I own Bitcoin? And what they're really asking is, should I take 90% of my cash and put it in Bitcoin? That's probably not a smart idea, right? Instead, it's, look, should I put 1 to 5% is kind of the numbers that you hear from a lot of people in this asset, and then forget about it. And if you lose 1% of your net worth or 5%, nobody wants to lose money, but at the same time, if it ends up performing well, you're talking about a very asymmetric upside, and so you could be talking about tens of percent increase in your net worth there.
I definitely agree. And, if we continue to see the Federal Reserve and central banks around the world doing what they're doing, then they're definitely going to be bringing people's attention to Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. And that's an interesting factor to consider, this whole economic crisis to put in combination. Because, Bitcoin, in my opinion, was designed for exactly this. And now we're going to see it put to the test. It was created in 2008. It was Halloween of 2008 that the white paper came out, and the very beginning of 2009, the first Bitcoin was mined, and here we are. And now, now the government's talking about, digital currencies, which is really interesting. So we've been seeing different bills being introduced into to like some potential laws, and that would be like the digital dollar being introduced. And I know it was taken out of the first bill, but the fact that they're mentioning it kind of gives us that idea of what they're going towards. And we're seeing China and other countries enacting the central bank digital currencies, the CBDCs. So I'd kind of like to get your thoughts on what you think about a centralized ledger, which is what it would be, not a cryptocurrency, just more of a digital system. But your thoughts on a digital dollar and central bank digital currencies?
Yeah, money today has a lot of issues, but most of those issues, in my opinion, in the developed world are not technology issues. They are monetary policy issues. In the non-developed world, there's a lot of technology issues, right? Depending on where you go around the world. And so what I believe is going to happen is we are going to have every currency in the world, whether it is a state-issued currency like fiat currency, whether it is a private corporation or it's a separation of state and money like Bitcoin, every single one of those currencies will be digital in the future. So there won't be a technology competition because everything will be digital currencies. Where the competition will occur is at the monetary policy level. And that monetary policy for the fiat currencies is not going to change. So it's not a decision on, will digital currencies beat out fiat currencies because they'll all be digital. Instead, it's will the fiat currencies with their inflationary structures be better or more adopted or sought after over the Bitcoin monetary policy that is deflationary, disinflationary monetary supply, et cetera. So I think that's really where the core of the issue here is at the monetary policy level, not at the technology level, because it's just kind of a foregone conclusion. Of course, every currency is going to be digital in the future.
Yeah, no, and it definitely makes sense. And that was well said. How do you think that all this would eventually help or hurt something like Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies, especially decentralized?
I was really hoping that they were going to tell people that they were going to get their stimulus checks via a digital currency. Because if they did that, that meant everyone had to get a digital wallet.
Yeah.
And, again, I think if everyone goes out and gets a digital wallet, you'll naturally find people gravitating towards sound money. And so that would have been pretty cool. Nothing to say that they won't do more stimulus in the future or won't kind of accelerate their plans to do that here in the United States or elsewhere. But I definitely think that that's the key piece of this and what benefits Bitcoin is those digital wallets. And the second thing too is that there's a lot that needs to be kind of covered or discussed when it comes to these digital currencies that are issued by nation states around surveillance, right? We're already seeing kind of
completely trackable.
Yeah, we're seeing reports come out of China where not only will they know how much money you have and where you spend it, but they actually may be able to tell you what you're allowed to spend money on, right? Could they tell you what you're allowed to buy or not buy? Where you can travel, all these kind of things that, kind of seems like it's like, science fiction almost. But as you read plans for this stuff, you realize like that's what they're building. And so I think that Bitcoin obviously gives you an option to opt out of that nonsense, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, a lot of this stuff, when you said science fiction, it's very, very like Orwell, 1984, Aldous Huxley, Brave New World. I mean, it's pretty insane. Yeah, you might actually get your wish about the wallet thing. In that second piece of legislation, I know they were actually talking about specifics with the wallet. I know the government was talking, U.S. government was talking about having the post office being involved in that whole process as well. So, but I think we're going to see it being introduced in a wallet in the form of the digital ID sooner. And then I think with the digital ID being set up, I think that incorporating the digital dollars into it would just be an easy solution. But I think that they would push for a digital ID system, especially when you're hearing so much talk about vaccinations and the possibility of vaccinations to go to work. I mean, you even seen, or I seen Fred Bullard, I think is his name, one of the Fed presidents, I think it's in St. Louis, had came out saying that he had suggested that people get tested for COVID and basically wear a badge or something, or something saying that you've been tested. And the crazy thing about that is like the Federal Reserve has nothing to do with our government. And why is he trying to suggest something that has nothing to do with his job nor the Federal Reserve's job. I mean, that's kind of scary in and of itself. But I think we're going to see this digital ID kind of coming first. And I'd really like your thoughts, you know, like what you think about a digital ID system, because this, just like blockchain, and it's like a gun. It could be used for good or it could be used for bad. And it's like, I'm really encouraging people to realize the potential, the power that we have as individuals and the power that we have as a collective. Because if we want to stand up against this stuff we don't like, we completely have that power to be able to do so. We've just been conditioned and taught that we don't. And I'm trying to reignite that fire as much as possible, man.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point that the digital identity can be used for good or bad, right? And so in India right now, for example, I've had a number of friends come here to the United States, and on their phone, they literally have a mobile app. That mobile app holds all of their kind of personally identifying documentation. So think of your license, your passport, your birth certificate, your social security card, like all of those things. They're all digital and they're all held in a mobile app that's secure on your phone. And at any point, if somebody says, hey, show me, you know, one of those documentations, you can just 2 clicks, bam, you can show people it. That seems pretty cool. That seems way better than carrying around plastic cards or, you know, pieces of paper, all that kind of stuff. Now, with that said, what you get is, well, what carrying it on your phone is one thing. What happens when, to your point, all of a sudden, it's not just digital identity, meaning, hey, identify yourself. It's used for other things or it's used in other manners. And so I'll give you a couple examples. So the first is this idea of labeling people, right? You were tested or you were not tested. You were sick or you were not sick. You've been to this place or you've not been to this place. You are one religion or you are another religion. You are of one socioeconomic status or you are another. You are one race or you are another, right? We've seen that play out in history. It never ends well. And so I think that that's hopefully pretty well understood in the United States, and the American spirit would fight back against that. The second piece of it, though, is what happens if all of a sudden we begin to talk about, well, let's do digital identity, but we're going to actually make it embeddable. We're going to put it in the back of your hand, or we're going to put it in your wrist. We're going to, you know, put it a chip, and that chip, you actually don't know what's on the chip, or you may have ways to figure it out if you're technologically savvy, but the average person doesn't know, right? And so it's easy when you've got a physical card because you can just read what it says, right? And that's what the identification is. But I do think that we're moving towards this world where a digital ID doesn't necessarily have to just be on your phone. So, you know, what does that entail? And there's a whole can of worms there to unpack. But then two is there's also this idea of almost like identification with consent, which is that if you are identifying somebody in some manner, they should be able to know what you are identifying them with, right? And so you got to avoid the labeling stuff. That doesn't end well. And then also, as we move to more technologically savvy, you know, structures or mechanisms, how do we ensure that everyone knows what their identification actually says, right? And I don't think we kind of thought through that stuff yet. We're far away from this, I think, far being, you know, it's not going to happen this year. I think it'll take a couple of years to really get this kind of implemented, especially in the United States, in any serious way. But it's definitely coming, and it's something that we should be talking about now, so that when we do go to the implementation phase, we kind of have a lot of the hard conversations out of the way.
No, it makes a lot of sense, but I will say, man, I've been looking into a lot of stuff, and MasterCard, they're partnering up with Microsoft. Everything goes back to Microsoft too. MasterCard is partnering with Microsoft, and in that also is working with MasterCard is now working with different countries, including France with their digital ID system. I think we'll see a cell phone version of a digital ID a lot sooner than what you're thinking. And I mean, we see it in China already. So, and then adding in the digital dollar aspect, which is exactly how China's been doing things, I think could definitely happen. If you look at digital, like ID 2020 information and just kind of go down that rabbit hole, Blythe Masters, I'm not a big fan at all. She's heavily involved, and I think they're trying to make this happen a lot quicker. And there's so many different projects that are involved in this, and they're all partnered up, that I don't see any way that they can't be getting this thing done a lot faster. It seems to be like a very, very important thing that they're working on. And even people who are like high levels in Microsoft, I feel like are putting in a little bit more work hours than they would normally, to get this thing done. So it's an interesting thing. And I would definitely like to, as time progresses, I know your time is running out, so we're going to go ahead and wrap things up, but I would like to, talk again in the future and kind of like, talk more about the progress of some of these things we've discussed. But I guess before we really do wrap up, was there anything that you wanted to say or any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think the big thing is, well, first of all, thank you for having me. I enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you.
But second is the message that I have for folks right now is just all around personal responsibility, right? And this is a perfect example where there's a lot of people who are hurting right now, right? They either lost their jobs, their businesses are shut down. There's an uncertain future ahead for them. They're angry, that they're confused, they're sad, right? All of these emotions are kind of running through them. And the two pieces of personal responsibility that I think are really important is first, being able to control their emotions and psychology, right? Literally being able to kind of take a deep breath, step away from the computer, and realize the decisions that I make over the next 12 months are going to have a really big impact on the next couple of years of my life in many cases. And so I need to make sure that I'm in a psychological state where I can make sound decisions, right? And I think that just hearing the idea of like, I need to control my emotions and make sound decisions is a great reminder for people. And then the second thing is, as you go to make those decisions, like ultimately you are responsible for yourself, right? And I think that our entire society has gotten into this weird rut where everyone, for the most part, looks around and is looking for other people to solve the problem. So it's, is the government going to save this? Is this person going to save this? Is this business going to save this? Is my, business partner going to do this? Instead, if we can get back to this idea that, you have to be responsible for yourself, because no one's going to look out for you more than you look out for yourself. Right. And that's through educating yourself. That's through the decisions you make. And ultimately what you do from a financial perspective to make sure that you and your family are protected and can ultimately thrive. And so I think that having people who start to understand, you, me, and anyone else all have the same tools at our disposal when it comes to personal responsibility.
Yes.
It's not a thing that is reliant on socioeconomic status or anything else. It's a mindset of, I need to do what I need to do, and no one's coming to save me. And I think it ultimately will lead to a much better outcome for folks. But I get nervous because I see across the board, across industries, across facets of life, there's not a lot of people who are kind of taking that approach, and I don't think it's going to turn out very well. So I think that would kind of be my resounding message here, is just taking personal responsibility will lead to a much better life, I think, than not.
Wise words, man. I appreciate it. I definitely love what you had to say. And I definitely think that personal responsibility is something that people need to be looking into. Being self-sovereign, that encompasses everything. If this is something that interests you that we're talking about, look up self-sovereignty and seek it, because we definitely need it. So Anthony, man, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this, man. I look forward to our next conversation, and I hope that you and your wife stay safe and healthy during these crazy times, man.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me. We'll definitely do it again.
All right. Much love. And that brings a conclusion to my interview with Pomp. I do hope you found value in today's video, and I definitely do encourage you to explore my channel. If you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Make sure you go ahead and smash that like button if you haven't already. Hit the notification bell so you can stay up to date with my videos as they come out. Follow me on LBRY, where I post exclusive content. And as always, I encourage you to be the change by practicing change, and I love you all.